Okay, it's launch time. Welcome everybody. Really happy to have you with us tonight. We have an action-packed agenda. We hope at the end of the evening you will feel more informed about the situation of what's going on around Penn Station, what's called the Empire Station Complex by the Empire State Development Corporation. So we have for you tonight several very accomplished speakers who are going to give you information about what's going on there and what we hope maybe can change in this situation. So first, we're going to have Lynn Ellsworth of Human Scale, Eugene Singliano, who's involved in what's going on over there and is a resident of West 30th Street. Barry Caro and Karim Ahmed from Rethink NYC are going to give you a summary of sort of future plans that we might be able to implement. And Sam Turvey, who is the chairman of Rethink NYC, is going to lead end us out. So, without further ado, Lynn, you can introduce yourself. Just unmute and go right ahead. Take it over. And Ben is going to be doing the slides, so just say next slide.
Next slide, Ben. There we go. So, let me just close this out. Hello, I'm Lynn Ellsworth. I'm chair of Human Scale NYC. I'm also an economist and got my PhD at UW-Madison in economics after getting a master's in international economics at Columbia. My specialization was in economic development. Next. So this is a GIF that shows the variation in population in Manhattan from a low of Sunday afternoon to a high of Wednesday afternoon. It shows what concentrated development looks like. As many as 2 million commuters were packing into Midtown and Lower Manhattan every weekday prior to COVID. This movement and concentration of people creates its own economy and its own set of economic incentives and opportunities. It's all concentrated into a couple of neighborhoods, Midtown and Lower Manhattan, as you can see, which are among the densest neighborhoods in the country already. This image is from Jason Fong, who's got a great website on that. You can look at that later if you're curious. Next. So there's a lot of negative side effects of this kind of excessive concentration of people. There's a massive overcrowding of commutes, there's unmanageable traffic jams, and even more unmanageable trash pileup, as shown here from the financial district. Next. This kind of overconcentration also creates one of the incentives for the arrival of what's been called a tsunami of money from around the world seeking real estate investments in New York City, especially Manhattan. Next. The situation also gives rise to incredible demolition incentives. On the left, we see in blue all the demolition in Midtown's Community Board 5 over a 16-year period. On the right, we see that most of those demolitions took place in the 10 years from 2006. Next. These demolitions are ongoing, and this is an example of what they demolish. Great historic buildings here on 45th and 5th get replaced with these glass towers, often with public subsidy, to satisfy speculative demand for condos and Class A office space, which is not the lower price class of office space that small business prefers. Next. One of the consequences of all that speculative money pouring in is empty towers, with many blocks of darkened Midtown, much of which there are several blocks that are actually vacant most of the year. The Times has reported on this extensively, as you can see here. Next. This situation allows for the emergence of a highly concentrated real estate sector, a powerful industry and lobby here in New York City, with corporate entities capable of amassing literally the billions of dollars it takes to do skyscraper development. We even get billionaire family dynasties, which is not exactly what our founding fathers had hoped for in this country. In the middle, we see the CEO of Vornado, the city's largest real estate investment trust, chatting with Trump. Vornado is the company that is seeking the project to build the 10 towers under question around Penn Station. Next. This concentration of extreme wealth has gotten worse over time and it's remarkable. Commercial Observer reported that 75% of commercial real estate in terms of square feet in Manhattan is owned by 3 companies, Brookfield, Vornado, and SL Green. Next. Economists have long pointed out that excessive wealth concentration also leads to political distortions, where the wealthy and powerful have the most access to our political system, with an army of lobbyists, lawyers, and publicists calling the policy shots. Next. And real estate power usually gets to build what it wants, often with public subsidy, and with very questionable results for the broader public good. These excessive subsidies, questionable results, and other failures shown here at Hudson Yards, case in point, they're all well-known problems. The Empire Station Complex is basically an extension of Hudson Yards to the east. Next. So what's the alternative to, how do we fix these problems? One solution is to spread wealth and opportunity around the entire tri-state region with a regionally unified transit network. It will lower commuting costs, spread job opportunities, business, building, and investment opportunities around a much wider geographic area. This will create opportunity for smaller players and working people, not just the big guys. It creates efficiencies that make themselves felt throughout the economy. Next. There's a vast literature on this point about creating economic efficiencies through good transport. This is from Todd Littman's book. He's a policy analyst at the Victoria Institute of Transportation Policy, illustrating here just a simple diagram to show the many ways that improved transit creates benefits and efficiencies across the economy. It affects labor, capital, and the entire supply chain. Next. The benefits of such transport integration are obvious, and there is much consensus among economists. Note the first bullet point here. This is from a Brookings Institute report on transportation. It notes that the potential gains from efficient policies are large and well documented in the empirical literature. And I think what that means is we just don't have to argue about this anymore. Next. Public capital means goods like trains and roads and public infrastructure that is used by all. Even public schools would count. GDP refers to gross domestic product, and it's a measure of economic output. Rising GDP implies a growing economy. Output elasticity is a term economists use to refer to it's a measure of how much increase one can get in GDP from $1 of investment in public capital. There's one study that reported that investments in public goods and public capital will be self-financing in the long term. Another review of the literature that summarized some 30 years of research finds positive and significant elasticities. Next. This was an interesting Italian study that tried to measure the output elasticity of Italy's investment in public high-speed rail. It found an extra bump to GDP, the measure of economic output, of 2.6 to 5.6% over 10 years. Other studies show that the elasticity of public capital investment at the local and regional levels of government are much higher than when that investment is done at the national level. So the local level is even better. Next. So what we need to know is that investing in a regional unified network is very likely to raise regional GDP. And with rising GDP, you can issue regular bonds that don't need to fuss with you don't need to bother rather with speculative value recapture mechanisms, tax increment financing, and schemes where we have payments in lieu of taxes. This point was made by Elizabeth McNichol, a former fellow at the progressive think tank in Washington called the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Investment in public infrastructure, she said, will lift long-term economic growth and wages, which is what we want. And states, she says, can pay for it with debt, with ordinary debt. Next. So the conclusion, do this, invest in a regional unified network, which needs through running trains at Penn Station, which we're going to learn about here. Next. And don't do this. Don't invest in speculative office development that will displace residents and small businesses burden us with junk bonds, and demolish historic buildings. Next. And the larger conclusion is that investments in the infrastructure of the public realm, such as a regional unified network, public swimming pools, and great public education, these are the things that will lead to widespread equitable prosperity. Building office towers in Manhattan river to river will not. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Really appreciate that. And one thing I neglected to say at the beginning here is if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A, and at the end of this session, we'll be answering your questions live, and just type them in, and then we'll answer them. So next we have a speaker I'm really excited to hear from, Eugene Singliano, who's a resident of West 30th Street and member of the ad hoc committee of what's going on in that neighborhood for businesses and residents. He opposes the project and the destruction of the small businesses, but he is the owner of a small business in that area called Ultrasounds, a company that builds and restores high-end quality guitars and amps in the music industry. Sounds like fun. All right, Eugene. So hold on a second here. Just turn your camera on, Eugene, and you should be on the screen.
It's not letting me start video.
Hold on a moment. Eugene, ask to start video. Can you do it now? There you go. Okay, beautiful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eugene Sinigaliano, and I'm here representing hundreds of residents, 400 businesses, and 10,000 jobs that will lose their homes, offices, and work, with almost 2 full city blocks destroyed by the current fatally flawed Penn Station proposal. These residents and businesses rely on the lower affordable rents in our vibrant working class at-scale neighborhood. But Empire State Development is using their completely outdated, inaccurate, and therefore deceptive neighborhood condition study to portray our at-risk building and many others to be in disrepair and poor condition to help justify why they should be torn down. This is totally false, and our building and others on our block have undergone multi-million-dollar modernization and renovation over the past few years. Here are 4 pictures taken several years ago during our building's massive renovation that ESD used in their outdated study, which show corroded metal, slide 2 old and boarded up windows, construction scaffolding, and cracked exterior glass panels. In reality, our building is now a beautiful, updated, mixed-use, 16-floor, 1929 built Art Deco building with both businesses and rent-stabilized residential units. Here is what it truly looks like today. Slide 5, slide 6, and slide 7 show our beautiful new lobby. Slide 8 and 9 are new entrance with after-hours security keycard access. Slide 10 are new passenger elevators with after-hours security card access to your certain floor. Slide 11, new state-of-the-art fire alarm system. Slide 12, all new windows in our building. And finally, slide 13, a close-up of some very nice Art Deco details from the building. The 6 residential senior families in my building have lived here for over 40 years. Like many New Yorkers who've seen the dark times and later the rebirth of our city, we stayed, worked, and volunteered our time along with our neighbors to give back to the city we love and help build a stronger, better, more inclusive New York. We need all of you to help make our elected officials understand that we are not disposable or roadkill for Voronato's Penn Station project. Voronato would already have all of us believe the whole Penn Station area is their Voronato campus, but Penn Station belongs to all New Yorkers, not Voronato. We must all demand that our state and federal representatives protect us. We are their at-risk residents, businesses, workers who should not lose everything for another developer-backed corporate greed vanity project disguised as transit improvement. The horrible current Penn expansion proposal must be stopped. People's lifelong homes, historic buildings, businesses, a vibrant neighborhood, and community resources are all at stake of destruction. New York deserves a much better Penn improvement plan that respects and protects our homes, businesses, community, and responsible to the taxpayers who will very likely have to pay for it. A better plan should include creating a unified regional rail network and transforming Penn Station into a modern, through-running, above-ground station without massive displacement and misery to entire neighborhood. The pandemic saw Midtown Manhattan lose hundreds of commercial tenants, leaving empty skyscrapers with millions of square feet of empty office space behind, the highest office vacancy rate since 1994. At the same time, New York continues to suffer from an affordable housing crisis and homelessness. So why does it make any sense to bulldoze a working class neighborhood that already includes affordable and rent stabilized residential housing just to build massive amounts of new commercial space that no one needs? The short answer, it doesn't. But reason has never been a sufficient excuse for corporate greed and excess. I respectfully ask all of you to join us and let our elected officials know that the current outdated, fatally flawed, and wastefully expensive Penn expansion proposal must be stopped. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eugene. Really appreciate your passionate call to action here. Okay, and now we're going to hear from Barry Caro and Karim Ahmed, who are senior advisors to Rethink NYC Studio and rethinknyc.org, two organizations dedicated to advocacy around transit and urban governance issues. Barry is the principal of a political consulting firm, and Karim is a practicing architect. They have both been integral into the development of Rethink's through running proposals and have primary track level access on the project. That's kind of fun. All right, gentlemen, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
I think we're going to hit slide. Great, thank you. So we'd like to start with a quick review of the Gateway program. The Gateway program, which is sort of the impetus for a lot of this coalition and a lot of the work that's happening in the area right now. So the elements of Gateway can generally be categorized into three groups. First, there's a series of improvements to the Northeast Corridor in New Jersey, some of which, like the Portal Bridge, have actually already started. The Northeast Corridor is a critical infrastructure link from Washington, D.C. through New York and all the way up to Boston. Next slide, please. Of course, the largest and most urgent project, the new Hudson River tunnels, and the repair of the tunnels damaged by Hurricane Sandy. And that would cement 4 commuter and long distance cross Hudson rails into New York from the west, matching the 4 East River tunnels leading to Penn Station across the East River. And these adopted some of the studies and routing from the old ARC project, but face very different phasing requirements and a much greater urgency ever since Hurricane Sandy damaged the existing tunnels, which bring New Jersey Transit and Amtrak trains into Penn Station. Slide. Oh, no, sorry, back one. Thank you. So, however, even if these 2 new tunnels are built and the old 2 tunnels are fixed, there actually can't be any additional capacity to Penn Station. And that's for a series of complicated reasons that Barry will get into shortly. So the last piece of the Gateway program is Penn Station South, which is a new terminal station across the street from the existing Penn Station just south. And Penn South, just to be 100% clear, is really the only piece of the Gateway project that we, the FR State Coalition, objects to. Slide. So the Northeast Corridor Commission published a set of estimated budgets for the Gateway program, among other programs for the corridor in the next 15 years. Included in those budgets are $18 billion for Penn South and the Empire Station complex, $11.6 billion for the Hudson River tunnels, that's the fixing the old and building the new and repairing the old, and $10.88 billion for a series of other smaller projects throughout the region that will make Gateway more functional. Those are the improvements to the Northeast Corridor in New Jersey that I mentioned. For the purpose of our discussion of through running, there are a few points that will need to be addressed beyond Penn Station to allow through running to operate, and we'll get to that shortly. Slide. Besides the improvements to the Northeast Corridor, the Gateway program is generally structured as ARC 2.0. New tunnels lead to a new terminal station. But the needs of the city of New York City and the metropolitan area have changed dramatically in the years since ARC was studied in 2008. Hurricane Sandy demonstrated the need for a more resilient system. Development patterns and industries in the region have diversified since the crash in 2008. And most recently, of course, COVID has changed demand for office space in a way that can't be fully quantified yet, but certainly points to a lower demand for high-rise Class A office space in Midtown Manhattan. We need a different model of transportation infrastructure, not more of the same. We have a short video up next, which some of you may have seen at our previous meeting, and some of you may be seeing it for the first time. It's an introductory overview to Run. Rethink Studios' Run proposal is an alternative to the Penn Station South expansion, also known as Phase 2 of the Gateway program. Run uses all of Phase 1 of the Gateway program, all of Gateway west of 10th Avenue and all the work in New Jersey, the tunnels, the bridges, the yard work. However, it reallocates that $18 billion planned expenditure for Penn Station South and the Empire Station Complex to instead create a new, equitable, accessible, and resilient rail system for the entire metropolitan area. And I can go ahead and play that short summary video.
New York City has the best public transportation in the country, but it's built around getting people in and out of Manhattan. Any other kind of trip is much harder to make. That's a big limitation for millions of people living in the tri-state area. What if the whole region were connected the way Manhattan is? We'd expand opportunities for jobs, housing, and businesses all over the region, which is especially important as populations outside Manhattan continue to grow. This can be a reality, and Rethink NYC has a plan to make it happen. Right now, we have plenty of transit systems, but they only connect to each other in a few places. Anyone commuting at Penn Station can tell you that transfers aren't easy to make. Our plan allows these transit systems to operate together. With a few targeted changes, it's possible to get from anywhere to everywhere and unlock our region's full potential. Here's how it works. Instead of being the last stop on the line, trains run through Penn Station and onto new transit hubs outside Manhattan. Passengers will have many more transfer points, and no hub will be overloaded. Next, these hubs will connect every suburban transit line, which improves transit into Manhattan and between outlying areas. The result: every branch of the system comes together in one central trunk line. It's New York's regional unified network, Run. Run radically changes the way people get around the tri-state area. Commuters from upstate New York and Connecticut have multiple options. The Bronx has a major transit hub. The Sunnyside hub improves transit for millions and attracts business development. Penn Station is much less chaotic, and suburban New Jersey has robust public transit options. Plus, delays no longer hang up the whole system. Riders will almost always have an alternative route. This vision of the future is possible. Transit improvement plans and budgets are already in place. If we work together and pool our resources, we can build a world-class system that unites the entire region. Run. From anywhere to everywhere.
And I'll pass it along to Barry.
Thank you very much, Kareem. Ben, I'm actually going to ask you to come back to this slide after a minute. So just let me go to the next one, and I'll come back to this in a second. Great. Thank you. So to give you a bit more detail on exactly what we're proposing, you can think about Run as taking us from a 9 to 5 unidirectional bring the commuters in the morning, send them home in the evening system, which is what we have now. It's what we've had since Penn Station opened 100 years ago, to an anywhere to everywhere system. That anywhere to everywhere system lets you get a whole other variety of trips. It lets you go between suburban job centers, not just from one suburb to the city. It's the kind of modern system that our peer cities around the world have, as we're going to go over in a second, and it's the way the subway operates. If you're on the subway in New York City, you can use that subway to get to a lot of different destinations, not just one. If you're in the suburbs, you can go to Grand Central or you can go to Penn Station. Once East Side Access opens, if you're on Long Island, you'll have a choice between the two, but the other two suburban areas will not. Next slide, please. So again, just to compare and contrast exactly what the difference between the Empire Station Complex and Run is, the Empire Station Complex, $18 billion, as Kareem talked about. That's for a complete redo of some of the concourse elements at Penn Station, the expansion of Penn Station. It's a hub and spoke model. Again, folks coming in from the suburbs to the center city. It's the status quo, but bigger. Run is about half the cost. It serves multiple destinations, and it's a modern, efficient service philosophy. Next slide, please. So by no means is Penn Station the entirety of our region's transit problems. Anyone who's ridden through a lot of other stations in the city could tell you that, but it is far and away the biggest one. And that is because of how it is operated. Right now, we call it Penn Station, but it's actually Penn Terminal. For the overwhelming majority of trains that come into Penn Station, all commuter trains and some Amtrak trains, it's the last stop. Whereas for, think about the subway at Penn Station, the A train does not turn around at 34th Street. It keeps going. It keeps going to Lower Manhattan if it's coming from Inwood. It keeps going to Inwood if it's coming from Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. That's what we're looking to do here. Right now, if you think about the passenger experience at Penn Station, the thing that's going to stand out most for how absolutely miserable it can be was at least pre-COVID, I think, is the possibility of getting from the platform level up to the concourse level. If you've ever been on the concourse level, you wait, you stare at the big board, they announce your track, folks rush over, shove to get down one narrow stair or escalator, and then try to get onto their train. That is incredibly inefficient, it's dangerous, and it's unpleasant. What we are proposing instead is that you have wide platforms by reallocating space from tracks that are being used primarily for actually train parking at Penn Station at rush hour to platforms to move passengers, because that is the end goal of the station, is to move passengers. And by moving the passengers more efficiently, you can move the trains more efficiently. You don't have to have this crazy staged boarding process that is the bane of every commuter's existence. You can have a modern, relatively pleasant experience that is going to be more akin to what you get in any of our peer cities around the world. Next slide, please. Just to highlight here how crazy this system is, right now, because trains are turning around at Penn Station, they're going to have, they cross in front of each other when they're turning. Just keep looping this as I'm talking, Ben. So if you'll notice, some of these trains are flashing orange. That means that they cannot get out of the station because they're waiting for the path to clear. They cannot get in or out of the station because they're waiting for the path through the station to clear. That happens dozens of times a day. It slows down basically every single train that's using the station. It creates major risks in terms of the schedule. It creates major delays. It's unpleasant. It's not the way an efficient station works. Next slide. If you transition to a through running system so that trains keep going in the same direction in which they came in, as you can see, there's no more crossing trains. Trains come in, they unload, they load, they keep going. Again, that is how efficient systems work. It is way better to do that. It is way better for the passengers. It's way better from an operational perspective. And anybody who looks at this, whether it's the MTA, whether it's foreign systems, would agree that if you were starting from tabula rasa, this is what you would do. Next slide, please. So again, what we are talking about here is how do we optimize our existing assets before we spend tens of billions of dollars to duplicate them? Because the problem is not that Penn Station is too small. The problem is that Penn Station is inefficiently operated. Because size isn't the problem, expansion isn't the answer. Next slide, please. So again, when we refer to regional rail as a solved problem worldwide, what we're saying is that literally every time other than New York City, that a modern city has looked at how do we improve our regional rail network since the 1940s, they've come up with regional rail. The same answer every single time anybody else looks at this. Frequent all-day bidirectional service. In other words, it's not just about peak direction, peak hour train travel. It's about reverse peak travel. If you look at Metro North ridership trends, for example, prior to the pandemic, reverse peak, off peak growing far, far faster than peak, which was basically maxed out. The Long Island Railroad is building the third track primarily to allow them to run reverse peak service. If you are trying to commute to a job center in Long Island right now from New York City, you better have perfect timing on that commute, because for large swaths of the day, the trains only go in one direction. That is not an efficient way to use the system. And again, right now, just think about the number of opportunities that are on the far side of the city from a suburb, whether you're talking about sports stadiums, universities, medical centers, airports, major job centers, major arts and cultural centers. There are a ton of destinations that somebody in New Jersey or Long Island or Westchester or Connecticut would like to get to if it was possible to make that trip. But the system just is not set up to let them make it right now, so they don't. Next slide, please. Now, what has to happen at Penn Station to make this kind of thing a reality? One, as we talked about, you need to widen the platforms to increase vertical circulation from the concourses to the platforms. You also need a fleet of trains that are compatible between the the three networks. So you need trains that run on third rail and overhead wire. Fortunately, New York already has those trains. And fortunately, the trains that New Jersey is currently planning to buy for Gateway Phase 2 are easily modifiable to make them, you just have to add a third rail shoe, and then all of a sudden those trains are able to operate across the system. In addition, you need somewhere for the trains that are going through Penn Station from Long Island and Westchester out to New Jersey. The ones that are not going all the way out to the end of the line in New Jersey, you need to store them somewhere. Fortunately, part of the Gateway project is a yard. So we reuse that yard for LIRR and LIRR trains instead of NJ Transit trains. You need something similar for peak direction NJ Transit trains that are going through Penn Station, but are not running all the way out to Montauk or Port Jefferson or Stamford. We solve that with the yard, either a expanded and relocated yard in Sunnyside or Port Morris or Jamaica. There's any number of possible locations for that. But that's not something that is specifically all that expensive. New York is actually relatively decent at building above ground at grade infrastructure like that. What it is extremely bad at is building deep underground mega stations, mega projects in Midtown Manhattan, because obviously it's a lot harder to build something, 150 feet beneath Park Avenue like East Side Access, or 100 feet beneath Penn Station like they're proposing for Gateway for the Empire Station complex, than it is to build something at grade in the Bronx or Queens. And again, you can look at that in the actual projects the MTA has gotten done and how much they cost in various locations. If you're worried about projects going over time and over budget, do not build mega stations in Midtown Manhattan. It's a guarantee to have things go on. And the other part of this is to connect in the Harlem line and the Hudson line of Metro North. We add a tunnel under the South Bronx. So a quick tunnel, again, that's something New York is actually very decent at, is those kinds of tunnels connecting to those lines. And I think, and some upgrades to, again, above ground track infrastructure between the Queens and Bronx. That's what you need to do to have through running. And again, all of that adds up to far less than the cost of a giant station in Midtown Manhattan. Next slide. So I want to quickly go through here some of the foreign in this case, only seemingly foreign in Philadelphia, systems that we look at for inspiration for how to do this. Philadelphia in the 1980s built a system to work very similarly to how we're proposing to operate Run. Now, they haven't operated it that way because of other issues they've had, but they've built the system. The core of the system is this tunnel through Center City, Philadelphia, so that trains that are go through the middle of the city rather than just to the middle of the city, which is what they used to do. Saw an immediate boost in ridership as a result of that. Next slide, please. London Crossrail. London, again, it's a city that is very similar to New York in a lot of ways. Their major infrastructure project that they are working on right now is a tunnel that goes through the middle of London, so that, for example, Heathrow Airport is on the left side of that image there. Right now, if you want to get to Heathrow and you're in the east side of London, that's not really possible. They're expecting people to want to do that. Similarly, Canary Wharf, London Docklands, that area, that's on the west side of London. That's on the east side of London. So if you're in West London, you can't really get there. So it's this idea that you're going to run the trains through the middle of the city, and people are all of a sudden going to start making these trips that they're otherwise not going to have had a chance to make. That's projected to be at capacity the minute it opens. Next slide. That builds on something that Paris has been doing since the 1960s and 1970s, which is, again, connecting its historic commuter rail train stations. Paris had, I believe it's 8 to 10, something like that, train stations around the periphery of Paris, so that folks coming from each direction had their own station. They built what's called the RER, so that trains can run through the center of Paris. That is the single most heavily used system, the RERA. In Europe or the United States, it was at capacity again the minute it opened, and they've spent the last 40 years building more lines to try to relieve that pressure. That's that red line on that map going straight through the middle of Paris, the trains that used to stop on either side of it. And as a response to that, you saw the La Défense business district and a lot of secondary business districts spring up around that, going to a point we talked about earlier. If you have transit access to these outlying hubs, people will locate their jobs there, people will live there. Next slide, please. This is one that's actually ongoing right now. Our neighbor to the north, Toronto, they have a single downtown major historic train station. They are electrifying and modernizing their network on either side of that station so the trains can run through it, again, the way we're talking about. Their projection is that Toronto, a city that's somewhere between about a quarter the size of New York, will have more ridership on its equivalent of New Jersey Transit, Long Island Railroad, and Metro. Then their network will have more ridership than Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and New Jersey Transit combined for a city a quarter the size of us. I think if Toronto can do that, we can certainly do the same. And next slide, please. This one's one of my favorites. Los Angeles, the famously car-centric American city here, when they were trying to figure out how do we better have a regional transit network that better serves the needs of the Olympics, they didn't even really debate the issue. The answer was so obvious it was through running. And that's what they're doing at their downtown Union Station, so that, again, you can get from North Los Angeles to South Los Angeles in a way that you cannot do right now on their current network. Again, this was not debated. It was just obvious that's what they had to do, and they went ahead and did it. Next slide. So again, this is just a quick run through of all that stuff. But I think the really biggest takeaway here is that this is doable and that the ridership is there for this. The demand is there for this, and the commuter networks just aren't serving it right now because that's just not what they've traditionally done. But we've seen time and time and time and time again that this is a better way to operate the system than the way we do it right now. And with that, I think that's, can you go next slide, please, Ben? Right, and with that, I'm going to give it back to Kareem Achman now to go over some of this additional stuff. So Kareem.
Yep, thank you, Bert. As mentioned earlier, the Northeast Corridor published the set of estimated budgets that we reviewed a few slides ago, and then Barry reiterated. And for the purposes of our discussion, there are a few points, and that Barry noted that the projects in the Bronx and Queens and some of these rail improvements and improving the actual train cars We just need to address a few of these beyond Penn Station to allow through running. We're going to go into that now. So slide, please. The costs on the left are those estimated by the Northeast Corridor Commission for Penn Station South. And the costs on the right are taken directly from budgets allocated from MTA projects or values derived from unit costs from MTA and other regional projects. So if you see, for instance, the Sunnyside station, a station in a tunnel and yard in the Bronx and east of Penn Station, as Barry was mentioning, New York tends to be very good at doing these projects on time and on budget. They're doing the Penn Station access project for the New Haven line of Metro North to get into Penn Station right now. Doing, once again, all above ground 3 to 4 track stations all along the Northeast Corridor. In addition to those specific projects, we've also outlined other systemic improvements beyond the Gateway program with a 20% allowance for some of those relatively smaller projects to cover gaps such as electrification standards, track realignments, and station work within the trunk line. Slide. The cost estimate on the right for the improvements at Penn Station come from I'm sorry. Sorry, am I? Oh, pardon me. The cost estimation that's on the right in this slide are coming from improvements at Penn Station that the MTA presented a couple months ago. And that's for a station that, as Barry mentioned, widening platforms. MTA studied an option where you could widen up to 5 platforms in Penn Station. And they estimated that would cost about $4.5 billion. I'm sorry, no, we went 2 slides. I'm sorry, that was the confusion. Can you go back 1? There we go. Okay, that's correct. So the MTA studied a through running option, widening about half the platforms, or a little more than half the platforms in Penn Station. And that would cost, they estimated that cost about $3 billion. And so if we were to do the sort of systemic improvements that Rethink's been proposing, in addition to sort of a partial conversion of New York Penn Station, the total cost of that would be approximately $8.25 billion and would give a 35% increase to the existing New York Penn Station. Now compare that to the 39% for $17.7 billion that the Gateway program is proposing for Penn Station South. In that scenario, there would be slightly more service from New Jersey, whereas in a through running situation, there would be an increase in both New Jersey and Long Island Railroad service. But we resolved that in the next slide. Next, please. Yes, which is through running as part of Rethink's proposal, which is full through running in Penn Station. It requires a little bit more work, and so we increased just as a unit cost this platform widening and track alignments at Penn Station to $4.5 billion, and the same work outside of the station and outside of the system as a whole remains. Now, at this point, we get a 50% station increase, and that covers all of the improvements that you would see from New Jersey or the west of Hudson service. And we also get some east of Penn Station service that would be in addition to above and beyond what Penn South would accomplish. And you get that for approximately half of what has been budgeted for Penn Station South and the Empire Station complex. Next slide. So here's the bottom line. Rethink's version of through running increases service by a bit over 50%, which is equal to the New Jersey capacity and then some from Long Island Railroad and Metro North. But beyond that, beyond the service, the numbers, the quantities, the quality is really important. This is going to bring a 21st century transportation like you would find in any other global city. Through running achieves more service, provides more convenience, less congestion, and much more resilience for about half the cost of a terminal. Just to reiterate what Barry was saying earlier, the deep bore underground stations are what have proven to be the most difficult and costly infrastructure in the region and are most likely to run over time and over budget. And this is absolutely understandable because Midtown Manhattan is one of the densest and costly places to build in the world. Smaller, above ground elevated stations in the outer boroughs and suburbs tend to be much cheaper, on time, and on budget. By allowing the infrastructure outside of Midtown Manhattan to do a little more of the heavy lifting, we can dramatically reduce cost. And I think we're going to go back to that flyover video, Ben, just to give everybody a sense of context before we move on to Sam. Thank you.
At Newark Penn Station, the Northeast Corridor has 4 tracks, and passengers can connect to the path to Lower Manhattan. Here, the Northeast Corridor splits to Secaucus and the path to Jersey City. This creates a 2-track bottleneck. The Portal Bridge is part of the bottleneck, which Gateway would alleviate by adding another bridge. Secaucus Junction allows passengers on NJ Transit's Hoboken division to transfer to Penn Station-bound trains. Trains from these lines, however, cannot go directly into Penn. The Gateway proposal will loop in these lines. Gateway would also add a rail yard, which our proposal would use to allow some Long Island Railroad and Metro North trains to terminate at Secaucus.
And this is all the part of Gateway west of 10th
Currently,
Avenue.
there are 2 tracks entering Penn Station from New Jersey, and 4 tracks going out to Queens. Gateway seeks to add 2 more tracks coming in from New Jersey, but rather than having them run through Penn Station and connect to the rest of the city, they will stop at a new terminal, Penn Station South. Rethink NYC's plan improves on this by allowing the new tracks to run through existing Penn Station and out to Queens. By avoiding having to construct Penn Station South, we will also prevent the needless demolition of several Midtown buildings. Not only would Penn Station South require the destruction of the block directly to the south of the existing station, but also several buildings on the other side of 7th Avenue, as well as several on the other side of 8th Avenue.
And now we go back to elevated and above ground work.
The 4 tracks from Penn Station exit their tunnels at Sunnyside. Sunnyside currently has a vast yard used by NJ Transit trains during the day waiting for the evening rush hour. Our plan would move this yard to the Bronx, freeing Sunnyside for a new station, park, and connected development. At Woodside, the Northeast Corridor again splits, with LIRR branching out to the east for the Long Island suburbs. This again leaves the Northeast Corridor with a 2-track bottleneck. This can easily be alleviated by renovating the existing embankment, widening bridges, and adding 2 tracks. The Northeast Corridor joins here with the New York Connecting Railroad, a freight line. After this point, there are 4 track beds, but only 2 are used for passenger rail, and 1 is completely abandoned. Rethink NYC would rebuild and electrify the 2 other track beds. This is true all the way through to the Hellgate Bridge, which was originally built for 4 tracks. At Port Morris, Rethink NYC locates a station and a rail yard for some terminating NJ Transit trains. This is the last point in which Metro North's Hudson and Harlem lines can tie into the rest of the trunk line with the short tunnel. These critical changes we propose will give our city and region the base to build a truly unified transit system.
Thank you. And with no further ado, I'll pass it to Sam Turvey.
Thank you, everybody.
Sam, before you go, I just want to say, before you start, I just want to say, if you have any questions, just please type them into the Q&A and we'll answer them at the end. Okay, take it away, Sam.
Sure. So look, we know this is a lot of information and there are a lot of dimensions to this Empire Station complex, and that's why we're trying to take a few issues for webinar that we're doing, and we hope you have a better appreciation for what true running is and what benefits that it could provide to us. So I want to talk a little bit about a call to action and what we would like from you, and certainly now is the time. And I say that because we already, the Empire Station complex was scheduled for a final environmental impact study hearing earlier in the year. It has been suspended. It will probably be put back on the calendar sometime this fall. And obviously we will all have to make public comments then, but we'd like to see things change before then. And there has been a group that has been commissioned to do and to comment on some of that work that was appointed by the former governor It is the Community Advisory Committee for Penn Station is made up of a group of key stakeholders and elected officials, and they also added some working group members after the initial outcry over this proposal. Many in our coalition were not invited to participate in that group, although we do have a few renegades on there, and Gene Sinigliano, who you heard from, is certainly one of them, and Simeon Bancourt from the Historic Districts Council, who's also in our coalition, is in that group. And they're doing a decent job. The citizen folks on that at writing and asking for some changes to the Empire State Development Corp. We would probably have asked for more or pushed for more, but I want to credit folks who are working against considerable odds to change the messaging there, and they're there to be commended for that. I would say, this group is not only appointed by the governor, captive of the governor. A lot of the railroads and commuter lines have sat in on every meeting with very limited exception and been able to drip irrigate their point of view. And part of the reason we're doing what we're doing tonight is to make sure you hear from us, because we are very confident that we are talking about the international standard that should be used in a city like ours. It's cheaper, and it doesn't require us to throw people out of their homes and demolish 31st Street and many historic districts. There's huge upticks for this region. So now's the time, and here are some things we think you can do to help us. Within this link are the public officials who've already taken a stand on our behalf. They asked for a pause of this proposal and are asking for meaningful changes to be made. You can see below there's going to be an important meeting with the sponsors of this project, the Empire State Development Corp, on September 21st. Not a meeting for any of us, but they are supposed to respond to this Community Advisory Committee working group and see if they're able to make changes to this proposal that will satisfy members of the public, including yourselves. I would do everything you can to make sure your elected officials know the type of things that you would like to see. We have a petition that we would like you to go online and sign. For those who are with civic organizations that are on the call, please freshen up on letters you may have sent or submissions you may have made last summer. It's going to be very important, particularly with a new governor, that people know what the public thinks and why. Just a little flashpoint for folks on the right, the Historic Hotel Pennsylvania, part of the trilogy of McKinley and White buildings at the site, the original Penn Station and the Farley Post Office, is not on 31st Street, but very much is in the line of sight for this project. They want to tear it down and put up a super tall, as high or higher than the Empire State Building. And if you care about this building, please make sure that you write that. You will see in some of the materials we've sent out that there recently was a Facebook page sale of some of the fixtures inside the building, which is heartbreaking to hear about. While this building has not been run particularly well for the past 10 to 15 years, with a proper owner or adaptive reuse, this could be a wonderful part of the Midtown neighborhood. It also does not deserve to be roadkill. McKinley and White were among our finest architects. Next slide. Other things, we're going to have 2 or 3 more of these public forums. We're really going to talk about some of the urbanism issues presented at the next public forum, whether it's the historic resources in greater depth, density, view corridors, the fact that we're living in a year where people are proposing to build buildings that will materially block views of the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. We want you to know our points of view on that. This project's being done in a way that violates various of the zoning regulations for the area and things like sidewalks and egress and ingress. Well, everybody will saying they're doing everything they can. They very carefully opted for a program that wouldn't afford you the protections that you usually have. Our constituent organizations, we're a diverse group. We're rallied around this project, but it might be something that particularly interests you and what we're saying. Look at our different organization websites. If there's one of us you really like, don't hesitate to make a contribution. Public awareness campaigns cost money, and we could really use your assistance. Stay in it for the long haul. The myopia of their plan was obvious at launch and only becomes more obvious every few weeks. I was speaking to a journalist today who said, I can't even believe anybody is taking this proposal seriously, but unfortunately they are, and many people feel it's already almost fully baked, and there's just a few points of opposition like our own they have to knock out of the way, and then they can do this really terrible thing that's going to freeze frame in concrete for 50 to 75 years, a really awful proposal for New York. So we need to do everything we can to fight back. There was an article that appeared in Cranes, New York yesterday by Alejandro Swashburn, a professor at Stevens Institute and a former very senior designer for the city of New York. He very much said that we should rebuild the old Penn Station. We're going to be talking about that on September 28th with Richard Cameron, our lead architect, and some others. But that is not, and he points this out, in any way as far-fetched as some would think. In fact, he suggests it's easy. The hard part about building a train station is the track level. We have that mostly worked out. It needs to be converted to through running, which can be done fairly effectively. Everything's already dug or mostly dug. So, and why would we like a great train station like Penn Station? On top of that, you see the picture on the right of the Beatles returning to Penn Station in 1964. That might surprise some of you to see that. Some of us who were alive, like myself, when they appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, may remember that they then went down to Washington, D.C. and Miami to a concert. And I can't remember which of the places they took the trains to, but they did. And why? Well, in England, they were using the trains then, and as Barry indicated to you, now they're going to continue using the trains, and they're making investments in things like through running, and it's very important to their economies and to their ecosystems and to their balanced economic growth to develop that way. And you certainly saw what Toronto, just north of the border, is doing. So this isn't to say that other countries and continents do things better than us, but on this particular issue, they may have a point, and certainly the Beatles had a few hit singles at the time they took these trains. They certainly could have afforded airplanes, but they're used to using trains, and we should become ever more so as well. So please read Alejandro's article. Please, we can get you as much detail you want on any of the different proposals we're talking about, and don't let others do it. Be on the right side of history, participate and get involved, because this, if it's allowed to go forward, will be really terrible for New York City in a way that will be very difficult to do anything about for a long time. And the time, as I said, the time is now to raise your hand to be heard. And with that, we'll go to the Q&A, and thank you.
Great, thank you, Sam. And just a little note on that Beetle thing. They actually waited for Brian Epstein in the Lime Street station when he went down to London to negotiate their contract. I'm a Beetle fan.
The Lime Street station is a pretty nice looking train station.
Lime Street, yeah, it's a beautiful station for those who've ever been there. Okay, so if I could ask the panelists to, turn their cameras on so that we can answer the questions, and I'm just going to read them off. I know some of you answered them in text already, but we're going to just so that everybody on the call hears what the questions were. So the first question was from Susan Nile at 510. And she says, on what basis do you believe a regional plan will spread opportunity in view of the fact that the opportunities claims for these super talls are fantasies? Why would spreading corruption be a better idea than stopping it? So Lynn, did you want to answer that?
Sure, I can try.
You can turn your camera on, Lynn.
Camera's not turning on when I hit
whatever.
Start video.
Okay.
So I guess you just got my voice.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about spreading corruption. We're talking about a regional unified network that spreads economic incentives around through every node in the tri-state area that's on the network. And it is kind of perplexing why Vernado would want this right now to concentrate everything right around them. But I think given that Vernado is one of the three players that owns 75% of all commercial square foot real estate or commercial property in Manhattan, I can see why they wouldn't want through running. It's the rest of us who would want it. So it's not spreading corruption, it's spreading opportunity.
And it also, it should decompress. You're never going to eliminate the continuing demand for real estate, commercial or residential in Manhattan. We don't think that can, but you can slow it and try to get to a point where we're not cannibalizing our civic fabric. I mean, everybody's so proud that they're blocking the views of the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. Yeah, I don't think we should have to do that in New York City. I think there's enough sites that we can have new construction without throwing away things like that. But when we put this kind of pressure on these midtown business districts, people can't help themselves. And I think we need to try to get to a point where these various central business districts or locations, some would be new, some would be like Newark, New Jersey. A lot of great things can happen there. And in fact, many of these places have infrastructure that's underutilized right now. So let's take this whole Hudson River estuary, or however you want to define it, and make it work a lot smarter.
Okay, thank you guys. All right, next question. William Otterson says, will you be using the 2 tunnel boring machines stored under Park Avenue at 38th Street to bore the new tunnels for Harlem and Hudson lines? And I believe Barry answered that one.
Yes. So just to reiterate, as we sort of showed in the flyover and as Kareem talked about in more detail, our proposal to connect the Harlem and Hudson lines is a short tunnel in the South Bronx. Unfortunately, after those tunnel boring machines were stopped being used in the David Patterson administration, they've been there so long, they were partially disassembled and are no longer operational. In addition, after you build the new Hudson River tunnels, you'll have a nice little symmetry of 4 tunnels under the East River, 4 tunnels under the Hudson River, and we think you can take advantage of that symmetry to build a balanced, effective service plan that serves the whole region. So that I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. So the next question is also for you, Barry. Hold on, let's see who it came from. This is from Stuart Lee. What has been the response so far to the through running idea from the MTA, Amtrak, and other train system entities? Metro North, LIR, NJT. What did they say about the technical feasibility, the logic, the preferability? How has the response been from Governor Hochul?
So I can't answer the last part of that first yet. What I can say is that the Empire Station Complex was Andrew Cuomo's baby. While Andrew Cuomo was in office, you were never going to get a response from the people he installed at the MTA that anything other than that was a good idea. You can see that with the air train, how Cuomo was able to put his finger on the scale to sort of get his preferred options through. We have been sort of hitting a sliding scale when it comes to the reaction from the agencies. First, they said, well, this is completely impossible, pie in the sky, can never do it, not doable. Now they don't say that anymore because we've sort of demonstrated that it is possible. The new line, and I think Sam can speak to this quite better than I can, is, well, it would be pretty disruptive. Our theory is that tearing down several blocks of Midtown Manhattan is pretty disruptive too, as is completely redoing the existing Penn Station. And beyond that, we've submitted a lot of documentation to them that we'd be happy to, share in more detail later, that at no point in time would constructing this ever reduce by a single train the number of trains that could operate through Penn Station. I think I might have missed part of that in the answer. In terms of technical feasibility, this is 100% feasible to build. And frankly, I think if the political leadership told them this is your new priority to figure out how to get this done in a week, they'd tell us, hey, we figured out how to do it.
Right. Now, I want to reiterate what Barry said, and we've met with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of vendors on this issue, and we're very confident that through running could be implemented, and none of them have been able to come forward to me with any credible answer that suggests it can be. And I would go as far as to say that if the governor of New York, New Jersey, or the governors of New York, New Jersey Department of Transportation issued a request for proposal to implement through running in the metropolitan region, they would come back with a proposal that's better than ours, maybe even cheaper than ours, and they probably implement it as fast as leadership wanted them to. So I'm very disappointed in the answers that I've received from these various sources, and at a meeting we had, one meeting we had, it was all but suggested that, look, we have all the plans drawn up and we're all ready to go, and there's never been money like this since the 50s. So even though you raised some good points, we want to build this. And then we can do the really nifty things that you're talking about that have obvious merit and are being implemented in all over the world, in Los Angeles and Philadelphia. We can do that in 2080. And I think I said this on the earlier call. I will probably be dead, I regret to say. My children may not even be alive. And that's ridiculous. We need to compete with cities and regions, both domestically and internationally. And it is just not an acceptable answer to say that we need to implement a transit plan from World War II when we're entering the second half of the 21st century.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, next question comes from William Otterson. Will through running be able to unify the electrical requirements of all the trains, which are currently different in electrical power types, voltage, and frequency?
Yes. That's the short answer. We spoke with the manufacturer, actually Bombardier, that is building the bi-level, the electric multiple unit bi-levels for New Jersey Transit that are planned to do their fleet expansion. We confirmed you can add a third rail shoe to those vehicles at the cost of something like a seat or two per train. Kareem can talk in more detail about that. You already have trains that are able to operate across multiple voltage systems. The M8s, for example, on Metro North go from overhead wire to third rail when they go into Grand Central, because Grand Central has third rail and Connecticut has overhead wire. And right now, New Jersey Transit's existing rolling stock would be able to operate all the way up to New Haven. The way we know that is they do it. They do it. They do it when it's really important, i.e. football games. With that, I'm going to, Kareem, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, just that's not a joke. Just to be 100% clear, there is a train that's called the Train to the Game, which runs a New Haven Metro North Line train to the Meadowlands so that people in Connecticut can go to football games. So when it's really important, we can really put off. And I think that's also evidence, not just for electrification standards and how we can overcome that, but also for operational agreements. There's precedents throughout the region for that already. To your point about the electrical standards, actually some of the existing rolling stock already runs on multiple electrification standards. And the way it works is that no matter, pretty much for all of the inputs, there's always a transformer that brings it down to what the train actually needs. So it's really a matter of adding the ability to transform either another voltage frequency or another, or to do from the third rail. And that's what takes up the space for basically one to two more seats worth of space within the train to add that transformer. But on an order of the size, like the number of trains that we'd be adding, or that you would need to order anyway for Gateway, it would be a less than 10% of additional cost for them. That's why we added, if you remember that section where we added 20%, sort of an allowance. That's part of that 20% is upgrading those train sets.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Susan Simon. Is it possible to take these concepts directly to the new governor and try to liaison with her? She has shown herself to be much more people-oriented than her predecessor and may be open to this human-scaled and rational development plan.
Can I take that one? We would love to meet with the governor. We've reached out, we've sent letters, and we're currently pursuing advocacy. If anyone on this call is supportive of our ideas and has a strong connection to her office, we would appreciate any support to set up any meetings.
Great, yes.
Yeah, we've in our materials, we recently sent her a letter, and she's getting around to a lot of different things, but we're very much hoping to get in front of her, and frankly, meetings like this and your response are part of how you get people's attention. I do know that she, being from Buffalo, they have a beautiful grand train station up there that's not presently operating as a train station, but it's very beautiful. I think if you see the Thurgood Marshall biopic, you'll see it in that movie. And there have been congresspeople and others up there who've been very interested and involved in trying to restore train stations. I've mentioned the Utica train station on this before. So some of these concepts will not be foreign to her, and she's been involved in economic development statewide. And the great thing about through running is you're really talking about benefits for the entire region and probably, well, the whole state, but at a minimum of 75-mile radius from the station. And the knockdown effects, frankly, throughout the country, if people start doing things like this, which have been done in Toronto's a beautiful example that's on our continent. I am hopeful she will be open to it. There's been a lot of baking that took place under the prior administration, so we're gonna be an awful lot of unworking that needs to be done. But the good news is the through running concept, as Baron Krum said, isn't a deep tunnel process. A lot of it can be done fairly simply and straightforward. I shouldn't say simply and straightforwardly, but logically and straightforwardly, without some of the capital intensiveness of some of the other work, and maybe people could pivot quickly like we did on the L train.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from Gail Davis. How would climate change affect the Rethink NYC through running versus the ideas of the Empire State Development Corporation?
You want to take this, Barry, or should I?
Yeah, I'll start. I'll say directly, there's no point of vulnerability to climate change that our proposal has that the status quo proposal does not. So we're not adding any sort of vulnerability to climate change. Beyond that, when you think about the kinds of, there are tens of thousands of people a day right now driving from New Jersey to Long Island and vice versa. All you have to do is look at the Cross Bronx Expressway to get some examples of that, or go to Staten Island and look at the folks going across the Verrazano Bridge. Those are some of the most destructive trips in terms of the carbon emissions of our region. One, because they're so long. Two, because they add so much to the overall congestion levels of the roads, that taking those kind of trips off the road is going to have a disproportionate impact when it comes to reducing our carbon emissions. So that's one thing I'd like to add. And Karim, I think you can take the rest.
Yeah, I would say in terms of direct effects, similar to Barry, I would tend to agree. I think that one thing that this system does offer is resilience, which the hub and spoke system does not offer so much of. So if you remember the summer of hell, when you had frequent issues within the New Jersey Transit commuters, that was because you had all of these cascading delays that were caused within New Jersey Transit. With a through running system, because you have resilience, say you did have, God forbid, a hard storm and you had felled trees on one line in New Jersey, one of the train lines, or you had a fallen tree or something destroyed along one of the routes in Long Island. There would be alternative ways for you to have frequent service to get to your destination. And not only that, if, once again, God forbid, we have another huge hurricane and similar to Sandy, because you're setting up two tunnels that are going to a terminal, the system that is being proposed as part of Penn South still only has two tracks that are intended to permanently serve as through running for that Northeast corridor. The other two are intended to serve as a terminal tracks to a terminal station. And that really gets to the heart of the resiliency issues that we spoke about pretty much the whole presentation.
We also that Toronto example, I think, is really important, because we would expect a great increase in ridership in the region, and not necessarily into Manhattan, would be through the region or across the region in places like Newark and Patterson, New Jersey, and Sunnyside and Queens, White Plains, some of our traditional cities. We think you'd see a lot more activity. And mind you, one of the things I like about that, there's climate change as one part of the environmental equation, but historic resources and aesthetics are another part. And, you know, Newark, New Jersey still has some wonderful sections, historic sections about it. Its train station is actually a beautiful Art Deco train station. Lynn Ellsworth's going to laugh at me, but I'm always touting the movie Patterson. It's a, I don't know, an indie film about a bus driver poet in Patterson, New Jersey. Patterson, New Jersey is a beautiful city, and it would do well with a little economic activity, you know, and it is the kind of city that could benefit from this. And we're not talking about sterile corporate office parks off on outside Route 287. We're talking about adaptively reusing some of the great historic cities and architectural legacies. We have not just, we protect them in Midtown and then we reinvigorate them in other parts of the region.
Okay, great. Thank you. And next question, Vincent Bellafiore. Everywhere to anywhere except Staten Island. As somebody who goes to Staten Island frequently, I can testify to that. Let me just finish the question.
Oh.
Excellent concepts, add freight at night. Need one regional rail authority. Too many vested interests at this time.
Is that all from Vincent?
Yes.
Yeah, well, Vincent is a Staten Island resident and maybe not native. I'm a native of Staten Island, as is John Massendale. We do have in the next iteration of Rethinks a rail connection to Staten Island through Jersey City. And we have been after our leadership about this and very much do what we want to see Staten Island to be part of the connectivity. I'm very proud of my Staten Island roots, and in fact, I protested against the expressways that Robert Moses was going to build through the Greensboro on Staten Island when I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. But point taken, Vincent, we did very much do want to connect Staten Island, and it is going to be in the next iteration. This part of Rethink focuses mostly on 34th Street. I don't mean to step out of my Empire Station Coalition hat, but their broader proposals for the balance of the region will be coming down. But John, I don't know if you want to chime in, and this is Staten Island native or not, but we do have people who care about the rock, Vincent.
I have a comment about the other part of the question. You know, I've heard a lot about the need for a regional coordination on this. And yes, it does seem to make sense. And I could see why it could be difficult to do. Certainly not impossible. I think at this point, it's like you kind of need federal intervention to kind of herd the cats, to create the planning system necessary to get this done. And it's certainly not impossible.
One thing I'd also add in terms of the single agency, don't dispute that would probably be a helpful thing in terms of running this united service, but I'll also point out that you don't actually need it. So again, like there's a difference between what you need to have and what would be nice to have in this regards. In terms of right now, for example, the Connecticut DOT and Metro North operate the New Haven line under contract together. Something similar is the case with West of Hudson Service and New Jersey Transit. In Paris, in fact, on some of those RER lines I mentioned, they're actually operated by 2 different private companies, which feels like it would be a bigger lift than 2 different state agencies in terms of getting them to work together. So I don't think that you need a single governing body. Again, like I think that would be helpful, but it's not a requirement. In terms of, I just want to add quickly, in terms of the Staten Island thing, one of the things that this would benefit Staten Island by that we didn't even realize at first was, again, as I mentioned, getting those long distance cars off the road that right now are cutting through Staten Island. So you and Staten Island are having to deal with the traffic that results from the fact that we don't have a network that takes people from New Jersey to places on Long Island where they want to go. That would directly help you out to get those folks off the road.
And not to mention, it'd be great if there were more than one train in Staten Island, but let's not go there. Question number 9, Gail Davis. Has our Democratic mayoral candidate or any other elected official expressed any opinions about the coalition versus the Empire Station Development Plan? If so, what have they expressed?
Well, start with the part that I know is that Senators Hoylman, Jackson, and Kruger, our state senators, have expressed profound dismay with the Empire Station Complex project and have been very vocal in their opposition to it. They have proposed legislation to force the project through city's ULURP action. We have presented this to Senator Schumer and Congressman Nadler so far, and don't have any clear signal from them about this. And still working on a couple of other elected officials, so. And no mayoral candidate has said anything.
And I would just add in one point that while it would be nice that our mayoral candidate and other city officials and our community boards, and the community boards have been strongly against this current proposal, the truth of the matter is the city has no control over this at all. Empire State Development Corporation works for the state, for the governor and for the state. And the way the proposal is set, the city has absolutely no say in what happens at all. So while we certainly welcome our community board support, and they've been massively supportive against this proposal, the truth is it's only in an advisory capacity. So it's important to understand that we wish the city had control. If they had control, I don't think this project would be proposed or would ever have even gotten this far. But unfortunately, they don't.
Thank you, Eugene. Next question from Neelan Baptiste. On the topic of planned demolitions on 31st Street, I feel that moralistic pleas to the proprietors of these super talls and the state government is not going to be very effective. Let's not forget Nassau County, the most segregated place in America, racially and financially, got and stayed that way because of them. How would you get them to take you seriously?
That's a fair question. And, you know, there have been very few times in New York City's history where truth speaking to power has won. And we've had various methodologies recommended to us, ranging from trying to come up with an idea that they'll really like and get behind, which I don't think is as easy to do as some people would think. You have a multitude of interests involved, but when these style things have won, it is because the public has become more aware and more active, as we asked in our call to action. And you might say, gee, you know, you're not far enough along. And we might even agree with you on that, although we are in this for the long haul. And I think what happens in these things is there's typically a tipping point. The beginnings of the tipping point were the governor's resignation, as he had such a big part of this and such an autocratic methodology of handling things that you're now beginning to, you know, when even he started first running into troubles, you began to hear different people speaking out against this proposal that probably wouldn't have if he were as popular as he had been during the COVID panel presentations he did in the spring. So we're seeing more and more people come out and speak to parts of this proposal. And I think you're going to see more of that. And the person I referenced earlier, Alejandros Washburn, has no prior affiliation with Rethink or any number of people. And it's kind of, some people are very familiar with him and think highly of him, but that's a wonderful article. And I hope we start seeing a lot more people take that stand and make sure people realize that.
Zoom meeting about Penn Station. Yeah, so I'll call you later. I'll say it. Bye-bye.
Anthony, you're not on mute.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I was muted. Sorry about that.
So in any event, I think we're still looking for the tipping point. We're working hard at it. It's part of why there are 2 more of these, and we have other activities planned, including an Oktoberfest at the Hotel Pennsylvania to protest its demolition and the Sky Bridge's demolition. But we're going to keep at it. And, you know, when I was in 5th grade, I marched through the woods in Staten Island in the Greenbelt And Robert Moses lost that one. He, occasionally these folks lose, and this is one they need to lose.
I would also add one point in that we're not alone. We do have many state elected officials on our side that are against this proposal. We have city and community board people who are against this proposal. And in fact, because it's so radically expensive and there's such a less expensive way and better way to do this, I think we'll find that a lot of state officials who are upstate officials for upstate residents who don't want to have this huge cost in taxes to help pay for this will also come to our side. So I think if everybody works at this, we're not alone in this at all. And we've made a lot of progress.
And we've been adding members. We've been adding members to this coalition, and we welcome civic organizations who want to join our ranks.
Right.
Great. Okay, next question, John West. If through running can make Penn Station adequately efficient, then expanding the station to the south would not be needed. Avoiding condemnation of private property, displacement of homes and businesses, and demolition of historic properties. How then to make through running as efficient as possible? A track connection between Penn Station and Grand Central would provide east side access to New Jersey and west side access to Metro North. Through running between Penn Station and Grand Central would reduce the dwell times of trains in Penn Station. For example, instead of all New Jersey Transit passengers exiting the train at Penn Station, those heading for East Midtown would stay on the train rather than all getting off at Penn Station and using the subway and other ways to get to East Midtown. Reducing dwell time allows more trains to run through Penn Station. A track connection between Penn Station and Grand Central would provide greater convenience for New Jersey Transit and Metro North passengers. Come on, you don't like taking the shuttle?
Look, there are a number of proposals that have been made over the years for how to do a through running system in New York City. We believe that the inherent symmetry of 4 tracks under the Hudson, 4 tracks under the East River is the way to go in this, for one big reason being it is most compatible with the existing infrastructure and the existing proposals. And it is the thing that eliminates the need for the things that we think are least likely to go right, which are major infrastructure projects in Midtown Manhattan, trying to replace major infrastructure projects in Midtown Manhattan with more manageable projects outside of that area. I think particularly when you look at what is the opportunity here to do the most in terms of getting new people onto mass transit, it's serving these outlying hubs better. Grand Central is obviously a wonderful, wonderful station. But at the end of the day, the folks who are commuting into Midtown Manhattan right now from New Jersey are already on mass transit. So, I mean, I think that that's one of the things we would note to that extent.
And we've been in touch with John. We'd love to get, your cost information and your dwell time information. We have been poked and prodded and questioned, 3-4 times a day by different folks about all these different variables. And, what we have been suggesting to folks on this call is that we can implement this through running plan at half the cost and probably a bigger multiplier from the Penn South situation. While there's certainly some merit to a Grand Central connection, I don't think there's as much merit to as what we're talking about, and it doesn't have some of the opportunities in the outlying areas. We really need to know what the costs are, and so that we can do an apples to apples comparison, and that in some respects for us is part of the price of the ticket. We certainly, when we've appeared in front of CACWAG and since, or have had to respond to the MTA through their criticism and decks presented to the different public organizations or to their different commentary to the press. So we'd be happy to hear more about the dwell times and how that proposal would add the same capacity as ours would, how it would compare with Penn South, and a whole host of other variables that we'd be happy to talk about later. And we can come back to this at some point if we have the ability to make that comparison.
I have a thought about that idea, that just tossing this to you rethink transit guys. You know, one of the really interesting virtues of your proposal is the way it spreads incentives out throughout the nodes of the system outside Manhattan. And, you know, sort of connecting New Jerseyites from Penn to Grand Central is sort of back in the reconcentrating everything in the two districts of Manhattan, which technically people already have that access through the subway. So, you know, I'm sort of wondering if that's the best investment, given the need for investment on the other parts of the node. I'm just thinking about that economically, that's all.
I think I think we should, look, I think we should, we plan to sit down on John and George Haikelis on this issue some point in the near future. There have been a lot of conversations between Rethink and this proposal in the past, but we're going to do it again, and this is not the last of these that we're doing. If we think it's worthy of a further discussion in a forum like this, we'll do that.
Great. Next question, Gail Davis. What about flooding as a result of more frequent hurricanes? Can an argument be made that through running can be more resilient to climate change than a deep tunnel train changes? And I'm just going to go off camera for a moment. I have to take care of something.
Yeah, so what it would really mean is that if you were going to be for instance, what's happening in the East River tunnels right now, or what will be starting shortly, they're going to be repairing damage that was done by Hurricane Sandy, the East River tunnels as well. We didn't hear as much talk about those tunnels. And the reason is because if you have 4 tunnels that are going in both directions, it's easier to take one out of service, repair it, and still maintain a fair amount of service. If you were to take one tunnel out of service, and this was an option that that Amtrak looked at when it wasn't sure if we were going to get the funding for Gateway. If you were to take one track out of service, they would pretty much have to totally cancel NJT for as long as it took them to repair each tunnel. And that's not really an acceptable solution for people who commute into New York City from New Jersey. So in that sense, that it really contributes to the resilience side of things, that, you know, we anticipate that in the future, you know, as much as we're going to be trying to take cars off the street and contribute to more sustainable modes of commuting, as much as we're trying to do that, we are prepared for, and we expect that we will be facing storms. And the question is, are you going to make a system that's easy to repair when you have a storm, or are you going to make or are you going to keep a system that's very vulnerable to when you do have a storm?
Okay, Anne had to step away, so I'm just going to handle this last question from Stephen Marmon. Since the 2 old tunnels are supposed to be renovated once the new tunnels are built, doesn't running the new tunnel just into a terminal for new NJT mean that Amtrak service doesn't get the opportunities it needs to be able to increase DC, New York, Boston service?
That's actually a very good question. The way that they have gotten around this was by pretending they're going to, after this is all done, build another multi-tens of billions of dollar tunnel under the East River to allow them to increase service across the East River. I don't think that is very likely in the near future, to say the least. So if you actually look, if you dig into the appendices of the Northeast Corridor Commission documents on future train levels, they are not actually predicting more trains between New York City and points north and east post anything they're proposing to do in the next 15 to 20 years. Our proposal does allow for that by allowing you to use the East River tunnels as efficiently as you would be able to use the Hudson River tunnels. So that's a very good question, Stephen. No, they would not be able to increase service north to Boston.
Okay, so that was our last question, and we'd like to thank everybody for their participation and their candor in the questions. If there are other questions you have, you probably have some written material somewhere where we have a link or an email address to reach out to us. Please do. You know, we have a fairly distinct set of proposals in opposition to the Empire Station Complex. Many of them have an iterative component to them. You'll see when we talk about locations for Madison Square Garden, we have a few different locations, and anything in New York City is going to be poked and prodded and morphed, hopefully in the direction of the citizen and not in the opposite direction. And we consider this a citizens forum. I'm very happy, to hear from all the different people on here. I do want to do a small shout out to my friend from Staten Island, Vincent Bellafiore, who's been a transit advocate for a long, long time, but more importantly, he's a retired and highly decorated principal from the New York school systems and the Catholic school systems. And, when we say we want to do something for the citizenry, we want to hear from you. And I just call out Vincent because that's the kind of thing we want to see. Please raise your hand, join these forums, bring your friends, forward these along. And if there's a journalist you think we need to be in touch with, please let us know. We'll try not to screw it up. And I want to thank the hosts and co-panelists and everybody for the work they did. We're all trying to make this the best city it can be and the most human city it can be. And we appreciate your participation, and let's enjoy autumn in New York. It's usually a great time around here, and it certainly wasn't a great summer weather-wise. So let's hope for a great autumn in New York and some great debate on these discussions and hopefully progress. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Mhm.